What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Daily Dish, our final episode of the season for the Daily Dish, because the women's basketball season ended a little over a week ago, and then men's basketball is now officially over. Been a fun ride, but we'll get this last one for you guys. Again, I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks, and let's just get right into it. I mean, that Illinois game, I know we expected a tough game. We expected an offensive shootout, and it kind of became that at the end.
Yeah, and I think for a while, you kind of felt like Illinois at some point was going to go on a decent run. I mean, Taman Lipsey, a lot of guys have talked about it, but, I mean, it's just true. Basketball is a game of runs, so it's if you can match that. And overall, like, Iowa State's defense was really good, I would say overall, just because I feel like they slowed down Illinois for the most part. But, I mean, at some point you had to know that Illinois was kind of going to go on a really good or a really big run at some point to kind of take the game away if they were going to end up winning the game, which they did.
Yeah, and it kind of seemed like it was a game where it was the more efficient offense won it all, because Iowa State early on could not get shots to fall. I mean, it was like it took a long time for them to get into their groove and to actually start scoring effectively. And then Illinois was just kind of like hitting from the start. I mean, obviously you have Terrence Shannon Jr. on your team. He's always going to be a threat, and he was a threat early on. And then you see the Cyclones get into foul trouble. They can't get their lineups straight, and it just took a while for them to actually get their groove, and you can't have that this late in the season.
Right. And Shannon kind of went on. I mean, he had an amazing night, and kind of felt like it was one of those games where Iowa State knew that Shannon was going to find success. And instead of really looking to try to slow him down, they, focused on everyone else. And I feel like they've done that a couple times this year where it's like, okay, well, we know that this guy's really good, but, if we put all of our attention on him, that's just going to open up other options. But regardless, other than Shannon, no one else really had, that much of an effect. There's a couple guys for Illinois that, had decent games, but for the most,
Damask was pretty decent.
But for the most part, Iowa State's defense held up pretty nicely. But you kind of alluded to it earlier. The offense from Iowa State did not show up early on.
Yeah, and you speak about the defense. I mean, they also just didn't force turnovers at a high enough rate while they were also turning the ball over. Yeah. I mean, you look at it, and you can give credit to Illinois' defense, because that was probably the best game that they've played, and it really came at the right time to push them to the Elite Eight. I mean, they don't tend to lock teams down that much. They don't tend to force turnovers. Iowa State's a team that takes care of the ball really well, but I mean, so is Illinois, and it really didn't seem like Iowa State's defense was doing what it's advertised to do, and when it's not doing that, I mean, we've seen them struggle in the past, and that's just kind of it came to be. I mean, with how close the game was, I think one or two more turnovers probably would have pushed Iowa State up to a win, but in the end, their defense kind of took the night off on the game that mattered the most.
Yeah, and you've talked about it that, Iowa State's best when they are forcing a lot of turnovers, and that is when their offense is at its best, but, they kind of had to find other ways to start scoring, and they found that in Curtis Jones, who, had a really great night overall. I want to say he had 26 points.
Yeah.
But other than that, I believe it was for the first 10 minutes, he was the only Iowa State player that had made a field goal. So he was really like their whole – I mean, it was like 8-10 minutes. I can't remember exactly, but it was a while. They couldn't find anyone really outside of him, and they went on a decent run at the end of the first half to kind of push – the lead. I think they cut it to 8, or it might have been 10 at halftime, but and then they just kind of they didn't really have that same mentality for the rest of the game. They came out of the second half pretty well. I think Keyshawn put up 6 early points, which was nice, but other than that, I mean, offensively, they just couldn't really figure things out.
Yeah, and I know I definitely said it really did seem like a game of luck early on. Like, Iowa State wasn't necessarily taking bad shots. They were taking shots that tend to fall, shots that have fallen throughout the year. I mean, you look at like Keyshawn driving to the rim, his layups were just not falling. Rob Jones couldn't get anything to go through the net. I mean, they were taking shots that they've taken all year that have fallen, and they weren't going down early on. And Curtis Jones tried his best to keep them in the game. He definitely didn't want to go home. But in the end, you kind of need your shots to fall throughout the whole game. And I mean, yeah, Keyshawn started to get on fire early on in the second half. But then you look at the big glaring issue is that, you have Curtis Jones going off. You have Keyshawn getting back up to what he's usually doing at the start of the second half. Taman Lipsey's starting to find his rhythm. But then Milan was nowhere to be seen. And you after the first half, you're like, okay, everybody's missing. They're coming alive in the second. But Milan's still not coming alive. And I think that was the piece that really was the difference maker.
Yeah, and a lot of people have talked about it. You've certainly told me that he is the difference between like a good Iowa State team that we've seen the past couple of years to a really good Iowa State team, which they had this year. And yeah, unfortunately, his freshman year comes to an end. Not even just that, but on honestly just pretty silent performance from him offensively. You can't really count on his defense to show up. So really, his entire game was really just shut down. And credit to Illinois, who really took away all of his. I mean, he couldn't find a shot. Yeah,
no, he probably had a guy attached to his hip throughout the entire game. I mean, he did take some shots, but again, the shots just weren't falling. I mean, he didn't hit a single field goal throughout the entire game. I mean, we saw that once before where he's taken a few shots, they aren't falling, but usually we see him shoot more, even if they aren't falling. But he didn't take that many shots. We saw that at the end of the regular season in the Kansas State game. He had 0 points, made 0 shots. Yeah. So, I mean, if he's not making his shots, Iowa State, he is a major part of Iowa State's offense. So if he's not making his shots, Iowa State's offense isn't moving.
Right. And they got the offense going, pretty decently towards the end of the second half when they kind of pushed it close. I believe at one point it was down to 2, really close. But then I haven't gone back to look at it, but Keyshawn misses a layup, and then again, Milan has he's passing it to Keyshawn, but Illinois just kind of sees that right through. And I mean, that was really the heartbreaker. That was the nail. Yeah. I mean, it was honestly kind of crazy just because it seemed just like a normal pass from Milan to Keyshawn, it looking like they can push this to maybe overtime, but Illinois really just took the game away and was the better team in the last 5 minutes, which is usually the difference maker.
Yeah, and I think they were able to pull that game close because obviously TSJ got into some foul trouble, picked up his 4th early in the second half, and he had to ride the bench for a long time. But when he got back in for those last 4 to 6 minutes, he was the difference maker. He was getting steals, he was putting up points, and he wasn't fouling anymore. And I think Iowa State, they were starting to gain momentum, and he got back in, and they hit that wall. And then you're just like, maybe they can claw their way into overtime because they did have the momentum advantage. But then that turnover was just unfortunate timing.
Yeah, and Iowa State's kind of gotten lucky a couple times this year where they don't really have a great first half, but then they really turn on the second half. Really more than a couple times they've been able to do that. And it was not the case against Illinois. I think really that just poor shooting start in the first half really kind of set the tone for the rest of the game. I mean, I don't think Iowa State ever led in the game. I think Illinois pulled ahead early and just kind of kept going with it. So I think that's really the big difference maker is Illinois grabbed the momentum early, and while Iowa State, found their offense later on, Illinois just stayed the better team.
And they haven't really had to play from behind at all. I mean, most games, even if they're behind by a little bit, it's not like they're trailing for all 40 minutes. This is a game where they're trying to claw back. It's super hard to take the lead again.
Yeah.
They're trying to claw back the entire game, and they just couldn't get it back into it. I mean, because obviously it's a game of runs, and they just couldn't string together a big enough run to deal with the run that Illinois would fire back with.
Right. And, I mean, it just kind of sucks because you feel like this might have been Iowa State's best shot at an Elite Eight since, in a long time. And definitely since the Monte Morris, George Niang days back then. But, I mean, you do have to also give credit to Altsberger, who is continuing to get the team better. And while we'll hit on the transfers that left, they're not a lot of key departures. But other than that, I mean, you kind of see it on the emotions from the players. They really felt like they had a good shot at, going to the Elite Eight or maybe even the Final Four. But, I mean, they just really didn't have enough in that one.
Yeah. And I think, although it would have been nice to go to the Elite Eight, taking down Illinois was somewhat expected for them to win. Obviously, not extremely heavily favored them, but they were favored to win the game. They would run into UConn in the next game, and we saw what happened to Illinois in that game.
Yeah.
Nobody's beating UConn, especially not Iowa State.
Yeah, I will say, I'm one of the many people in America or around the world that picked UConn to win their bracket, so probably right over here. We got I want to say Creighton in our bracket pool, so over here, so I don't know how that ended up for you, but...
I just don't like to be boring, go with the easy picks, got to spice it up a little bit.
Some people like to be right.
Well, unless when UConn faces NC State in the finals.
That's another crazy story. I mean...
Yeah, we can talk about just
completely completely unrelated to Iowa State, but NC State going on this run. I think now they're in the Final Four, so would that be 9? Yeah, 9 straight wins dating back to their first round game against, I want to say, maybe Syracuse in the ACC tournament. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, yeah, you bring up that 9 straight wins. They ended the regular season on a 4-game losing streak, I want to say, and they'd only won 9 conference games the whole year. And now they've won 9 postseason games.
Right. One again. I mean, you get the 5 conference wins in the tournament, and then they beat. I want to say they played Duke too,
yep.
Who they beat. So I mean, taking down like a blue blood. I mean, I'm all for it, but I will say I don't know how much farther they can go. Honestly, since if they beat UConn, you might as well just pick them to win the whole thing.
Well, yeah, because do they play UConn next?
Am I messing up the bracket right now?
Who
are the games?
I think they play. I want to say they play Purdue.
While you look at that, yeah, I guess we could talk about. All right, we'll talk about Purdue a little bit. I mean, Zach Edey, I'm honestly just kind of surprised that he's still able to find all the success. I mean, I know, with how gifted he is offensively, but just like no team has really been able to shut him down in the tournament so far.
Yeah, and it is NC State playing Purdue to get to the finals. And I mean, you talk about Zach Edey, and everybody's saying, if he wasn't big, he wouldn't be that good. But, I mean, he's just been dominant. I mean, sure, he has a lot of size, and sure, he gets some calls favoring him. But, I mean, you can't deny that he is just a monster on offense.
That'll be great to see in that match. I mean, with Purdue, because Zach Edey will be going up against DJ. I don't remember his last name, but DJ Burns from NC State. I mean, that's going to be awesome to see, because I feel like if there's got to be a face of March Madness, I mean, I'm probably wrong here, but DJ Burns would be my face of March Madness, because he's kind of taken the tournament by storm.
Oh, yeah. It's either him or that one Alabama kid who's just caught fire.
Yeah.
The one with the mustache. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, DJ Burns versus Zach Edey, that's going to be the matchup that I think everybody's just waiting for. And, I mean, for good reason. I mean, DJ Burns has just kind of turned it on way more than I think anybody would have expected. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody loves a Cinderella story, and this is our Cinderella story. I mean, it is really hard to hate a team like NC State, who they're only in the tournament because they won their conference championship.
They were an automatic qualifier, but still an 11 seed. I mean, that's just kind of crazy to think. And, some might also be wondering, because, I mean, would they even still be here if, they've had a couple things go their way, because in their second round matchup, they had to play Oakland. So who knows if they could beat Kentucky if they would have won. I mean,
and then they only played Duke because Duke's able to beat Houston after Jamal Shed was injured early on. So it's like, yeah, they've had a decently easy path to get to the Final Four, but they've also had to play really tough teams. I mean, Duke, you can't sleep on Duke. Duke's a very good team.
Yeah.
Obviously Oakland beat Kentucky. They're, obviously, sure, they're a lower seed, and it's not like they were expected to win. But you have a team that can keep up with Kentucky's firepower, and yes, it was an off night for Kentucky, but it's still a tournament team. It's not like they're a 16 seed.
Right.
So, I mean, 11 seed being a 14 seed isn't a guarantee.
Mm-hmm. But,
so
I mean, it's been overall like I'm a person that doesn't particularly love March Madness just because I think a lot of people say it's the best postseason in sports, which I wouldn't exactly agree with. But I'm not gonna lie, there has been some pretty exciting games even outside of Iowa State, losing in the Sweet 16.
And I'll say something on that. As somebody who, I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest basketball fan. I'm like a football guy, tried and true. I will say March Madness is definitely up there, if not my favorite, just postseason, because that's the point where I'm going to tune in no matter what to all the games, because it's just, and sure it does kind of feel like a down year where there's not as many like buzzer beater finishes or crazy upsets. I mean, we got the Oakland game, but I mean, besides that and the NC State run, you're kind of like, what else is happening? But I mean, it's still an exciting time. And I mean, we got a lot of great storylines going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just hard not to love this postseason.
Yeah. I mean, 3 games left, so who knows? Maybe we will see we will see a buzzer beater in these last 3 games. And if we do, then just know that we called it here. So
yeah. And I mean, to speak on that, we can talk on the other side with I want to bring up UConn, Alabama, because I did obviously, after Illinois beat Iowa State, and maybe it was a little biased on the tweet, I did see how Illinois performed against Iowa State, confidently tweeted that UConn was going to just destroy them by over 20. And then UConn went on that 30-0 run, and I was sitting there, I think I had my feet up. I'm like, what'd I say?
Even though we already addressed that, if Iowa State was in that position, they probably would have also. They probably could have lost by 25 in that one. But to kind of move on to the other side, the women's tournament has actually been really entertaining as well. I was one of the 12 million people that tuned in for the Iowa LSU matchup. Not particularly as an Iowa hater, but just really because I wanted to see a good basketball game, and I feel like we did get that. And on the other side, between USC and UConn, that was also a pretty awesome game to watch too.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, unfortunately, I didn't get to tune into that Iowa LSU game, although the hype was there. And I mean, I think it lived up to the hype. I mean, they obviously was a close game. I think, I think Iowa is a better team this year than they were last year, and I think LSU is a worse team this year than they were last year. So it's kind of like almost expected that Iowa was going to win that. But then on the other side, it's so great to see like USC, UConn with just all the faces there. You have like Juju Watkins and Paige Beckers, 2 really good players who, I mean, it just seems like the women's basketball is in such a good spot right now where there's so many great faces for the sport. It's like you're going to have an entertaining game no matter what, no matter which side you look at.
And unfortunately for, whoever has to go get in their way, just as much as, on the men's side, you're going to have to play UConn. On the women's side, someone's going to have to play South Carolina, which almost seems kind of,
yeah,
like you can pretty chalk at this point.
I think South Carolina is on a warpath right now, and it's really hard to pick any team to get over them because, I mean, it's just South Carolina. This is probably the best team we've seen in a very long time, and I just don't think – I think the gap between South Carolina and everybody else is way bigger than I think anybody wants to admit. And to kind of finish off talking about like March Madness, obviously Iowa State is not in March, isn't playing anymore, so we can kind of recap their season as a whole. I mean, we just released our awards that we gave out, and it kind of brings up the topic of like who was the player that really was the MVP of the season. Because I mean, you can look at, obviously there's people like Taman Lipsey. You got to know that he is super impactful to the team, especially the defense and the mindset that they use throughout the season. Keyshawn Gilbert, obviously high scoring. Curtis Jones, 6th man of the year. And then the guy I want to bring up is Milan, because for a freshman, Milan was such a crucial part of how this offense performed. Because, I mean, when he wasn't on, Iowa State wasn't on. We saw that in their loss to Illinois.
Yeah.
He has an off night, and they go home packing early.
Yeah, and you talk about it already, how great he looks as a freshman, and it's honestly really great to see that he will not be one of the players that's entering the transfer portal, just because I feel like he's already developed so much here at Iowa State that he can, just get even better from here. And, Iowa State's going to need him when they're, kind of reloading in this offseason. So, Milan's a great pick. I, in my article, mentioned Taman just because I feel like just the same way with Milan, if he's, when he's on, the rest of the team is, they're having a great game. When he, you want to call him the leader, the floor general, whatever it is. He's great defensively. I feel like he's definitely kind of spearheaded the move from Iowa State to be, that really defensive heavy team. And, he's developed the 3-point shot, which I think is, for him to go out into the offseason last year and be like, you know what, I need to develop this or else I'm, not going to be able to play at the next level, or, it's just going to help out Iowa State even more. And he did. And I think he really deserves both him and Milan are great picks really for the MVP of the team.
Yeah. And kind of talking about the defense, and also kind of the 3-point shooting. Kurt Jones was somebody who was super surprising to me because I had him as my most improved player because at the start of the season, he was struggling a lot on finding his shot. No rhyme intended, call me a poet. But what he showed was how great he was on defense. And for Iowa State, a team that is, in the TJ Asselberger era is not known for its offense, for him to be coming off the bench with that defensive mentality, his physicality, the amount of effort he plays on every single possession. There's a reason he was earning minutes when he wasn't scoring, and it's because of his defense. And that just kind of pushed Iowa State to wins early on.
Right.
You just can't say enough about it.
Yeah, and he's another guy that I think is just going to get even better next year. We already saw him take the jump mid-season, really, this year. And I think he ends up finishing with 60 or 70 threes. That's just crazy, especially when you're going up against really good defensive teams in the Big 12. So, yeah, he really kind of, at the midpoint, TJ talked about it, in that TCU game when Taman's out and Kurt gets the start. That ever since then, Curtis Jones has played one of the best guards in the Big 12 at least. Maybe, I don't know about in the nation, just because I don't watch every team, unfortunately. But I think, he really just took a major step in the middle of the season, which I commend him for. Yeah,
and you talk about that TCU game, he almost broke the steal record that Taman had set earlier in the season. And it just more adds on to his defensive intensity, and he's just always on his man. He's pressuring. He's one of the guys that forces double teams a lot.
Yep.
He doesn't really give up shots, or at least good shots. And once he paired that with his offense, he found his 3-point shooting. He has that nice little floater in the lane that he shows occasionally. He's somebody that is incredible coming off the bench because, he plays like a starter. That's kind of what you need from your 6-man.
Right, and he showed his ability to start in that TCU game. It's obviously you can't – he's probably going to be in the starting lineup this upcoming season since he's staying – we don't really know. The portal is still, open, obviously, and I'm sure Iowa State is, they're still hunting down guys, but Curtis Jones has definitely made the case for being a starter in this next, upcoming season.
I think the only thing would be that none of the guards are leaving, so really the reason he wasn't in the starting lineup is because Keyshawn Taman and Milan were taking those spots, and I think going forward they'll still take those spots. Just if things on the team stay the same way.
Yeah.
And then those last 2 spots will be given to whoever they pick up in the portal. Obviously they've already picked up one big man, but they got to find somebody to fill in for Trey King.
That's true. I do like that you mentioned that because I'm a fan of the 2 guards, 2 forwards, 1 center, or 2 guards, 3 forwards, because I feel like guards kind of just, if you have too many in there, they're most of them typically used for just shooting. So if they're all off, but it's besides the point. But then moving on, like another award that we had was most exciting player, and I think really that's where Keyshawn takes, because we saw it in his first game at Iowa State that he just has a nose for getting into the lane. And I remember I asked him about that, and I'm like, you seem like you just have this relentless intent to go inside and get a shot up, and he really stuck with it the rest of the season when he said that it ain't no science to it, which, I mean,
just
it's
get buckets.
It's just what he does, and that's what makes him just so exciting to watch.
Yeah, and I think going into the season, obviously he was my player to watch, because the way that he carried himself before the season, his relationship with TJ, and just the way he was talking with his teammates beforehand, I was like, you could tell this kid was special. You can tell that everybody on the team loves him. He loves the environment. He loves TJ. He loves the system. And, I mean, he just loves the game of basketball. And, I mean, that's a scary thing to go up against, is somebody who's just having fun. Because, I mean, the way he finds lanes, getting into the lanes, the way he's creating shots. And, I mean, he has a three-point touch. I mean, you look at his game against Baylor, where I think he knocked down 5 threes. You look at, he was hitting daggers against Kansas at home. I mean, throughout the season, he was like Iowa State's main scoring threat. I mean, because Taman kind of took a backseat after his injury, and with Taman taking a backseat, it was Keyshawn who really took the reins of finding the offense.
Yeah, and Keyshawn got tested a couple times on the court, because he plays with that really great mentality of like being physical and getting inside, and he got tested a couple times in the postseason. One of which I remember was against South Dakota State, and then there was one in the Big 12 tournament. I think it was Baylor, but I mean, and then he just shows that he's a talker a little bit on the court, and he backs it up. So I mean, you can't knock him for that.
Yeah, and you talk about the postseason. The guy that I had as my most exciting, Hassan Ward, who, sad to see him go, because he's, really, he hit a stride at a really fun time in Iowa State basketball. But yeah, I mean, I love dunks. I don't think anybody can say they don't. So for a guy that's that tall, that long, and for his athleticism, I don't know how many people I asked about, it was after his, I want to say it was the Baylor game.
Yep.
Where he caught like 5 lobs. They were like, yeah, we just kind of throw it up. He can catch it from like 12, 13 feet and slam it through. I mean, Curtis Jones said it best. He's just like, yeah, we just throw it up and tell Hassan, go get it. I mean, and he does. Yeah,
he's one of those guys where, me personally, I wish he was around for another, like just one more year. I feel like you're almost kind of fine to see, Trey King and Rob Jones go, but with this new, kind of offensive gift that Hassan has, and like how dynamic he makes the team when he's on the court. I mean, you kind of wish you had him for one more year, but you could also, if we want to real quick hit on transfers, me personally, I also wish Iowa State had Pavletsky for another year, just because he's kind of been my favorite. I love, watching small guards go out and ball, but he, it definitely makes sense for why, he chose to leave the program. And it's on a good note. It looked like on social media, everyone was kind of congratulating him. So
yeah, no, he did what he needed to do at Iowa State. I mean, he was that plug, that spark guy off the bench early on. And I think really what he did was throw a wrench into really the opposing team's plans. I mean, they have, they've drawn out all these things of what, they know what Keyshawn can do. They know how big of a threat Milan is from outside the arc. They know how intense Taman plays the game. But they're like, what do we do when Jackson Pavletsky gets in? Because, right. I mean, when he gets in and he's on, he is really intense on the defensive end, and he can find buckets.
And he actually I didn't even notice. He finished, he didn't take a ton, but definitely, he actually finished 40% from 3, which is kind of crazy to think about. When he comes in, that's usually what he was doing, is kind of hunting down the 3-pointers, but, he's usually only taking 1 or 2 a game when he comes in, but he played really solid in non-conference play, and Chris Williams from Cyclone Fanatic said it on his podcast that he's going to go somewhere else, and he is a much better defensive player. So wherever he goes, I mean, they're going to really get a gift in him as a defensive player. And, he's been the point guard at other places too. So it kind of sucks to see him leave just because of how much I like to watch him play. But wherever he goes, maybe he'll have the same effect that Baker Mayfield has on me, where anywhere he goes, I'm going to watch his games. So
yeah, and I mean, he was one of those guys that he was really high up on who I expected to leave. If he had stayed, I would have been very surprised because, I mean, you saw it over the postseason. We're in the locker rooms after the games, we see him, and yeah, like he is. Everybody on the team loves him. He loves the environment, but you could really tell that he wanted to play and wanted to help the team, but he just couldn't because once you get into the thick of it, when you're like, yes, he's going to be really good against those non-con teams. He's going to be really good against some of the not so great Big 12 teams, but like he can't compete well against the defense of Kansas State. He can't compete well against Houston, just everything.
Yeah.
And then you get into other conferences, and as Iowa State was playing, like the speed of South Dakota State, the size of Washington State, the just all around intense offense of Illinois. There's really not a game when it matters that Jackson can make a difference. And I think he saw that and he's like, well, if I'm just going to be like the 7th guy, 8th guy off the bench, like maybe I can bring my talent somewhere else where I'm going to be the star.
Right.
And now he has the toolkit now that he gained at Iowa State to go make that happen.
And I'm sure what he's looking for is probably just a place where he can kind of call home for the next, 2-3 seasons, where he knows, he can be maybe not even necessarily a starter, but just like a solid bench guy or whatever, just kind of 5 minutes. Because I like how you talked about that. In the postseason, he wasn't getting on the court, and it kind of sucked to see. But, I mean, kind of what you were saying, you had to realize where it's like, well, with Taman out there, Kurt, even Damarian Watson, Keyshawn, like there's only so many minutes that you could find. But the same could also be said for, Omaha, who was, we have, what is it, 3/4 of the 2023 class that is now just gone. And Omaha definitely highlights that. And it sucks. It also sucks to see him go because you have a feeling that if they could develop him a little bit more, he could be seeing more minutes. But, I mean, good for him for, going out to find somewhere else. But it does suck because of how big of a prospect he was for Iowa State to land.
And, I mean, the thing with Omaha is it's sad to see him go because he's not even just like a great basketball player. He's an incredible human being.
Yeah.
And he is just such a good thing for Iowa State in the fan base. And, I mean, just to see the support of this, like, almost hometown kid who was a stud in high school. And I mean, you just know that he can play well, and he wanted to play well. But I think I'm glad to see him go too, because I mean, I think he would benefit from going to a school that can use his talents, because I don't think people want to hear it. I mean, Iowa State is just not a good fit at all for Omaha. I mean, the way that he plays the game, the way that he kind of thrives off transition buckets and playing around the rim, the way he's, just very intense. He doesn't really fit Iowa State's defensive-focused mindset where they can't really get him opportunities on the offense because that's not really their game plan. Their game plan is maybe move the ball around, get your small guards inside for some buckets or at least fouls, or just knock down threes on the outside with Milan or Kurt. And I mean, that offense and the slow offense, I would say, because they're not really a great transition team or fast break team, it just doesn't fit Omaha's play style. And you can kind of tell when he was in the minutes he had, he is obviously still learning how to play the defensive intensity at the next level. But his offense he looked a little lost because there really wasn't a lot for him to do. I mean, it's tough to have your five-star recruit setting screens, and that's about it.
Yeah. And I talked to someone over the weekend about this, where it's like, it feels like he just wanted to be like, and everyone did too, but especially for him, like he wanted to be good at Iowa State so bad. And that's kind of what it sucks to see that. And I also was talking about how he always, like when he would get checked in, he would always kind of look like a step or two behind. Just kind of, and I mean that comes with not playing a lot. So I think a step behind defensively, and that's not his fault at all. I mean that's just like
it's just a lot to learn.
Yeah, and it was against or was it in the Kansas State game in the Big 12 tournament. I think he gave some really solid minutes in there. That was definitely the best he's looked all season outside of, I mean, you can look at his stats against, like, I think it was Grambling when he had a good game, or Prairie View A&M back in non-com, but those are definitely, like, the best minutes he had was in that Big 12 tournament, and I think that's really just what all these transfers this season have in common. Same to go along with, kind of hit on Caden Fish and Jelani Hamilton and Pav. It's like, we just kind of want to play, so that's really what it's all about. It's not like they don't agree with the system or the culture, or at least I wouldn't think.
Yeah, and like the last thing with Omaha, you talked about he just wanted to do well so bad. And obviously there was times where he looked kind of nervous out there. I think him transferring and going to a different school should help alleviate that pressure, because if he's not he wanted to be just a star at Iowa State so bad, and it was clear that the fit wasn't great for him. But if he goes to a place that fits his play style, and he doesn't have the pressure of you're a hometown 5-star recruit who could possibly be this superstar Hall of Fame player. And now he's at a school where it's like, just play. You're just another player. You could be a star. There's like no pressure for him to succeed. And I mean, now he can just kind of go out and do what he wants.
Yeah. I mean, expectations definitely got to affect kind of your mentality, but something that shouldn't be surprising and everyone should expect is that Iowa State and TJ are already out in the portal now. Already picked up two, they pick up Deshaun Jackson from, not the Eagles wide receiver, but Deshaun Jackson from Charlotte. And then we were talking about this before. I hope we say it right. Is it Nate Heise or Heisey?
Say Nate.
What?
We'll just call him Nate.
It is Nate?
Yeah, we'll just say Nate, so we don't mispronounce the last name.
Nate from UNI. But they're coming over. I'm not really sure. I need to watch them a little bit more, but I'm not sure about the Nate pickup. But Deshaun Jackson should be awesome in terms of just kind of making up for all the forwards that they're losing. I'm sure Nate will be, if TJ, he always talks about, recruiting guys that want to be Cyclones. So by no means do I think it's a bad pickup, but I'm definitely just going to have to see how it turns out next season.
Yeah. And obviously I think Nate has a pretty good offensive mentality. He was scoring a lot of points at UNI. And I mean, keep him in state. He is honestly he's 6'5", isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a decent sized guard. I mean, he should be almost, I don't know if their play style is a little different. Maybe TJ can work on it, but he's almost just like a bigger Jackson. And I mean, he can get buckets, teach him some defense, and should fill in pretty nicely for who they lost.
Yeah.
And then I watched a good amount of Deshaun Jackson just because I was curious, because, you have that build of like he's 6'11", I think like 260 or something. I mean, he's large bodied, which they need, and he has really solid touch. He has handles, and I mean he can score, he can slam it down, he can catch balls in the lane. He's a really good passer, which is something that I definitely wanted Iowa State to get. Yeah. So I mean, I know it's early to predict how he's going to do in the Big 12. Yeah. But he does seem like a really good pickup.
Yeah. And I mean, this might be the most versatile, forward that Iowa State picks up in a while, especially you mentioned, his ability to have he has his handles and his ability to pass the ball. And I think this is really just Iowa State going out and being like, well, the big men are coming back in college basketball, so let's go get ours.
Yeah. And I mean, you lose Hassan Ward, you lose Robert Jones and Trey King. Those are your three big men. And really all they're keeping is JT Rock, which
nobody knows what he's going to look like.
I know, but I am kind of excited for him because he's 7'1", and you can't coach size. Yeah. And he's got size.
We've seen what Zach Edey can do, so.
Yeah, just take a few inches off Zach Edey, and hopefully that's what we get from JT Rock, because he has been putting on some size. And he doesn't, at this point, he doesn't look like a high schooler anymore.
right, well, this kid's bought into the program and he didn't even play this year. So
yeah, and I mean, there's other targets I think Iowa State's looking at.
Yep.
So, we'll know more, and we'll probably tune into like our Sports Weekly, where we'll probably do short segments over transfer updates for men's and women's basketball, because there's been a decent amount of news already, and we're just in the start of it.
Yeah.
But for now, I think Iowa State's probably really should focus on just filling out their bigger part of their roster, because, I mean, they have enough guards now to really keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's an exciting time. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly looking at portal updates, seeing where everyone's going. I mean, I've never really been this much into college basketball, but now, I mean, a season where we could say, as we're wrapping this up, we only saw Iowa State lose one game. So I think,
unfortunately, because we had to go to that Kansas State away game.
So I think really, if more Iowa State fans knew that, they might have wanted us in Boston for that Sweet 16 game. But just wanted to say we covered a great season. It's really weird to, honestly say that we covered a top 10, a
top 5
team in the nation. So, watched them win. What was it? Would have probably been close to 30 games, or 25, whatever it was. Just really pretty an exciting season for all of us.
Yeah, and I know everybody's disappointed they didn't win it all this year. Sweet 16 is still pretty sweet.
Yeah,
I'll be honest. TJ in his first 2 years gets the team to 2 Sweet 16s, and we get to cover a team that wins the Big 12 championship, team that's made the Sweet 16. This team's been fun, and we're not really losing that many people. It could be more fun next year, so going to be exciting to watch. So I think that's all that we have for you guys today. Unfortunately, we're not going to be waiting and seeing on anything. We've waited, we've seen, and we've seen greatness. So it's been fun. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Daily Dish, and tune into Sports Weekly. We'll, obviously spring football season starting up, so we'll have some more content for you guys always. So thank you for watching.